This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John Blake.
And I'm Evan Grant.
Are the Bats finally waking up? Well, the Rangers went 3-3 over the last week, but the headlines on the club, a little bit skewing negative. Josh Young is at AAA, and Kevin Pillar had some things to say on his way out while announcing his retirement. Plus, former first baseman Will Clark joins us, and I'll have a look back at the 1996 season when the Rangers finally won their first division title, but it wasn't easy.
Why didn't you say we are thrilled that Will Clark will join us?
I guess I didn't think of it.
Yeah, well, exactly. If you're listening to it for the first time and you haven't heard our witty banner, this is our weekly spinoff of the Dallas Morning News SportsDay Insider podcast. You can find it in the SportsDay Insider feed wherever you consume your podcasts.
If you want to interact with the show, you can reach each of us on X. I'm Ranger Blake, and Evan is at Evan_P_Grant, and we'd like your questions. Did you get any questions in your mailbag after your plea last week?
I think I might have had one. I need to go back and see if I can find it. But please send us questions. We want to hear from you. We want to solve all of your issues. If you can't get to me on Twitter, you can always get to us at my email, egrant@Dallas News, or you can reach out to the Dallas Morning News on any of the paper's social media channels.
Bottom of the ninth, bases loaded. Here comes Jimmy Dale from Baker Brothers Plumbing, AC, and Electrical.
Thanks, Chuck. When your home pitches curveballs, Baker Brothers knocks it out of the park.
Home run, Baker Brothers. Incredible.
As the official home service partner of your Texas Rangers, we're offering $300 off a tank or tankless water heater.
Another winning call. Visit callbakernow.com or dial 214-342-1171 today.
Baker Brothers.
Great service.
So the All-Star selections for the 2025 All-Star Game next week in Atlanta were announced the other day. And frankly, I mean, I'm not as in tune to the All-Star. The last 2 years have been quite an All-Star crush for me. 2 years ago in Seattle, the Rangers dominated the game with 5 starters. And then, of course, last year in Arlington, it was nonstop for about a week. And Bruce Bochy was the manager of the team. But Jacob deGrom was picked for the 5th time. It's a great story, coming back for his first All-Star selection since 2021. I think, what do you think of the selections? Should the Rangers have had somebody else? And what about deGrom? Does he have a chance to pitch in the game?
I really do wonder what the situation is going to be with Jacob. I know he has made it very public that he's thrilled about this and wants to be able to share it with his family. And I don't know if that just goes to the experience of being around the All-Star atmosphere and being at Home Run Derby and all of that, or if he wants them to see him pitch. If I'm him and I'm the Rangers, I probably would want to dial that back, especially given the workload that he's had. But it's one inning. It essentially would be on a bullpen day. And listen, the last time or maybe not the last time, but in 2016 he pitched 1 inning, just needed 10 pitches to strike out the side. So it'll be a great story if he does. I won't be surprised if he doesn't pitch. And as far as the other Rangers, look, I think there were 4 guys that had good all-star cases, but it's not enough. In the case of Josh Smith, the one position player who had something of a case, there's no position for a utility guy. And unless you add that to the player's vote, like utility guy, I think he's always going to come up short because you look at all the positions he played, there's 2 guys at each of those positions who were definitive all-stars and belong. And so the only way he would make the team would be as a utility guy or as if the Rangers didn't have a pitcher and they needed a designated all-star, he could have been there. Hobie Milner has had a great first half, but it's hard to get a middle.
Situational middle relievers, it's not – they don't get voted by the players.
Correct.
I mean,
that's starters and closers.
Right.
That's it. And then, Nathan Eovaldi also had a great case. But I think when you miss a month, and as strong as the pitching field is this year, when you miss a month, that's going to work against you. And, he doesn't have enough innings to qualify. If he did, his ERA would be the top, but he has missed a month at this point. And so I think, quite frankly, the Rangers are fine without him being there. And I'd love for Nathan to get another All-Star bid, but I think that you can't argue that there were any mistakes any egregious mistakes over him in the All-Star pitching selections.
And I think the way the selections go now, the players do a great job at picking the pitchers and the reserves. They get the right guys there. It is a much different vibe than the All-Star used to be 15 years ago, where you did get, aging stars that kept getting voted in and making All-Star teams. I realize from MLB, would you rather have a Mike Trout or a Bryce Harper or somebody like that at your game? But you're getting the best players, and frankly, that's who should be at this All-Star game, are deserving players from 2025.
And look, MLB has the ability now to name legends.
Legends, correct.
Clayton Kershaw has been named to the All-Star team as a legend. So if they want to do that, they can do that. But I do think that in terms of the guys who are having the best seasons, the All-Star process is about as good as it's ever been. And I do think, to that point too, John, I think that fans, I don't want to say more educated, but I do think that fans get the starters mostly right. If not the right guy, certainly somebody who's in the picture, and then the other guy who's going to end up playing more at bats probably gets voted in by the players.
And we're going to talk Ranger All-Star memories next week. I've got a couple of stories where I might have gone off on a selection of an MVP one or two times, but we'll get into that more next week. So let's talk about the Rangers as they stand. They've gotten Evan Carter, Jake Berger, Wyatt Langford back in the lineup. Looked pretty good offensively on Saturday night at San Diego. Last night had a chance to break it open there early in the ball game
against an opener and in a bullpen game.
And Jake Cronenworth made a really nice play, but what is your assessment here of this lineup? And Bruce Bochy had a pretty set lineup for the weekend in San Diego.
Yeah, I think this is as close to let me walk that back. I just think that right now you see these games, you see Friday's game, you see Sunday's game, and you say you've seen this game over and over and over again, that the Rangers don't either tack on when they take an early lead or they have no real ability to come back when they face a deficit. And that's been the case over and over, and it's why he's sitting here at 90 games as we go into the week. They were 44 and 46. They've had ample opportunities to get back over the hump at 500, and they just haven't taken advantage of it. And I just think, we're another 10 games past the midpoint in the season. This team has continued to show that this is who they are. And for me, the concerning point now is you look at Seattle. Seattle's 4 games ahead of the Rangers now in the American League West, and for a wild card berth. And you're starting to get some separation there. When it was 2.5 games, it's, go out and sweep a series and maybe you're right back in it. When it's 4 games, you've got to have a really good week. And the Rangers just haven't shown the ability to play extended winning baseball.
And speaking of the American League West, as we speak, the Rangers now have 7 games in their own division. They'll play the Angels 4 times and then a big weekend series in Houston. But the Angel games are big too. And you've got your big 2, deGrom and Eovaldi, starting 4 of these 7 games. So the Rangers really do need to make a little hay here and show that they've got a legitimate chance to at least be a wild card team.
And I think it's really, 4 and 3 would be a nice week, but I really think it's important that the Rangers win 5 of these 7 games and go into the break above 500. I think when Chris Young and Ross Fenstermaker sit down at the break and actually have some time to really calibrate where this team is, it sure would look a lot better if they finally gotten over the hump with a good week in the division on the road, all of which have been problems for this team. I think this team is now 10 games under 500 on the road. You do that and you go into the break, it changes the perspective. But I've yet to see a reason why I think the Rangers are going to be able to run off that kind of week.
Okay, before we bring Will Clark in, let's just address for a minute some of the comments that Kevin Pillar made. And he wasn't with the team very long. He was hurt for a good part of that. And, I think you and I have talked, chemistry is what it is. And you don't see teams that are struggling, very few teams have whatever it is, good chemistry or whatever. And essentially, this is a lot of the same guys who were here in 23 when everybody was talking about the card games and everything like that.
Look, and the card games in 23 and some of the other things didn't really develop until late in the year.
Right.
All of the elements that Kevin talked about, I'm not going to dispute any of them. The idea that there aren't guys just sitting around talking baseball a lot, we certainly don't see that. But I do need to make it clear to people that what the media sees is just a glimpse. And you know this better than I, especially in this clubhouse, which is huge. And there are much more player amenity and not just amenity, but workstations for players to go and do their pregame stuff. And listen, if Corey Seager isn't in the clubhouse and he's not taking batting practice on the field, let me assure you, it's not like he's taking time off. He spends good 2 or 3 hours every day on the phone, FaceTiming with his hitting instructor to work on his swing. I think the bigger issue for this club is not so much like what happens in the clubhouse. I think it's the thing that Chris Young addressed earlier, and that's the lack of team connectivity in the dugout during games. It's part of why I think iPads were taken out of the dugout for a few days, is there was some need to coax this team. And I've said this in other interviews, John, that I don't think it's just isolated to the Rangers. I think
Correct.
This is throughout baseball. And I'm really interested to talk to Will about what he sees as a hitting artist, what he sees in the game. But I think that the idea that this team is a little bit individualistic in the way it approaches the games, I think you can see that on the field. I don't think you need some great sense of eyes inside the clubhouse to see that. But when it works, when everybody's having a good year, like they did in 23, it looks great. And, you say all you got to do is be ready at 7 o'clock. And when it doesn't work, then you're saying, well, what can we do to try and make it work?
Coming up, our guest on the podcast is a guy who was a catalyst in the first extended run of success in club history. Will Clark spent 5 years with the Rangers, winning division titles in 1996 and 1998. And we'll talk to Will the Thrill. I got the thrill in there for you. Coming up next. Well, our guest this week played 15 seasons in the major leagues with the Giants, Rangers, Orioles, and Cardinals. 303 career average, 284 home runs, and 1,205 RBIs in almost 1,980 games. Was a 6-time All-Star, 2-time Silver Slugger, hit over 310 times. Top 4 MVP 4 times, and was the MVP of the 1989 National League Championship Series. Also has the most home runs lifetime off Nolan Ryan, hit 6, including his first major league at bat in 1986. But he came to the Rangers, played 5 seasons from 1994 to 1998. He hit 308, which is the second highest career average in Rangers history, and his .485 on base percentage is the third highest. Hit over 304 times, and was a part of the first 2 postseason teams in Rangers history. Since 2009, he's been a special assistant with the San Francisco Giants, and had his number retired by the Giants back in 2022. We're very happy to have Will Clark with us. Will, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, John. I'm looking forward.
So let's start. We're going to talk about the Rangers here. You're coming off, really good. What would it have been? It would have been 8 seasons in San Francisco from 86 to 1993. And then the Rangers, you signed with the Rangers after the 93 season, going into the new ballpark. So just tell us a little bit about the circumstances with that. You're replacing, Rafael Palmeiro as the Rangers' first baseman. How did you come to sign with Texas?
Well, the basically said, I should go free agency. And so I went out there and I looked, and it was Baltimore, Texas. And, one thing about the negotiation all the way through Texas was they were very consistent. They laid out their contract, and then they stuck with it. And I really appreciated that. And so I decided to sign with them. I was fairly close to home. I'm from New Orleans, so a lot of friends and family come see me play. And then, it was one of those things where, it was a good challenge because the Rangers had a good foundation for a ball club, and trying to get into the playoffs and eventually the World Series.
But that it was a club that had never been to the playoffs at that point in time, and I don't know. Like when deGrom signed here, the idea was brought up that this team had never won the World Series. Did you feel like, Baltimore had a lot of tradition, and you had come from a team that had a lot of tradition and had success. How much did that weigh on you that you were going to a place that really had not ever known success, or was it something that you did embrace?
It was actually something I really embraced. It was like, I've been on several teams over the course of my life going up to that point where, teams kind of underproduced, I guess you wanted to say. And especially for the Rangers. I mean, it wasn't the fact that they didn't have enough offense. That was without a shadow of a doubt with, Juan Gonzalez and Pudge Rodriguez and, Jose Canseco was there in '94. And so, there was a lot of offense. It was just the fact that we need to stop the other team. And, '94, as you'll probably get to, wound up being a strike year, even though we were in the brand spanking new ballpark. And, all the fans were really looking forward to coming out and seeing some games at the ballpark. And then 95 came along, and all of a sudden, over the course of that strike, I actually had a talk or two with our GM, Tom Grieve, and I told Tom, I said, we need pitching and defense. And over the course of the next year, he got it, and 96 became a completely different story.
Well, and then during that transition, remember, Doug Melvin took over for Tom, and the first thing Doug did was he hired Johnny Oates. And
yes.
What kind of change? And we can compare 94, 95, but did you see, obviously the first part of 95 was very tumultuous with the replacement players and you guys not getting back till April. But did you see in 95 that this team with Johnny at the helm could be the start of something special?
I definitely could see it being something special. Johnny was very mellow in his demeanor, but at the same time he had a lot of confidence and then a lot of emotion.
Will, Johnny's been gone, unfortunately, for over 20 years, and there's an entire group of Ranger fans that have grown up not knowing really what this guy's contribution was to this club. You've described him as mellow. I also knew him as a guy who was very he was, I'd say, a little bit tightly wound around media for sure. But one thing that I thought he understood so well, and this plays into what you did so well, was let the players run the clubhouse. And I'm curious as to, like, from a leadership role, you were in a leadership role. How did what Johnny do empower you? I don't know if you needed to ever be empowered, Will, to be perfectly honest, but how did what his approach kind of work with your approach to policing the clubhouse?
I was fortunate enough to have Dusty Baker as a manager in '93, and Dusty, kind of trusted his veterans to run the clubhouse, and so, that was pretty unique, and I loved doing that role because not only myself but also some of the other veterans would take up shop, and then all of a sudden you look up and you got Mickey Tettleton and Mike Hanneman, people like that. So you had other veterans that really kind of stepped up and helped run the ball club. That way, Johnny, could manage the day-to-day stuff and not have to worry about the little things in the clubhouse. And another guy that did it later on in my career was Tony La Russa. He did the same thing. And so it's really a good formula if you get some veterans that are all on the same page and control while the manager oversees it.
So, Will, talking a little bit about that 96 team, and we had Rusty Greer on a few weeks ago.
Technology worked better for Rusty, by the way.
Right.
Yeah. Technology is not working for Will the Thread.
But getting back, all 9 starters on that team had over 500 at-bats. Johnny had a lineup, and he just played it for basically 161 games, 160 games, because that 161st game after we clinched, you guys, I don't think were in any shape to play. But, Rusty said, especially in his case, he took the lead from you, playing with little injuries and that kind of thing. And he said that, I lockered next to Will, and if I knew Will was going to be in the lineup, it kind of put the onus on the rest of us to go out and play. How did you see that?
That was what, one of the attributes of a leader is the fact that, it's like, hey, follow my direction, because I'm gonna do what I say. And I learned that from some of my veterans in San Francisco back in the day, and coming on board to Texas. A perfect example would be Pudge. For as great as Pudge was, he would kind of every now and then come up with an excuse to not play. And then, I'd walk up to him, Johnny would tell me that, and I'd walk up to him and I'd go, look, we need you today. Come out here, let's bust our tail today. And then, you'll get an off day down the road. And I'll promise you'll get an off day down the road. And Pudge would go out there and he'd play that day. And we normally wound up winning, believe it or not. And so then you fast forward and you got a guy like, as you talked about, Rusty Greer, who's a new player, and it's like, Rusty, the only day you feel really 100% is your first day of spring training. After that, it's kind of downhill, and so you got to make do with the little injuries and the bruises, and you get hit by a pitch, and I don't have time to take a day off. I need to play, because my presence in the lineup means a lot, and especially Rusty, being a 3-hole hitter, then he's setting up the lineup coming behind him. So he needed to be in there. So, those are the kind of little things that we did as leaders and veteran players to show the younger guys, hey, look, you can play and you can be really successful, even though you're not 100%.
Two things. One, I don't think that was exactly the way you delivered that speech to Pudge, but we'll let it go for this podcast.
Yeah, that wasn't exactly kind of the way. I toned it down for your audience right there.
Thank you, Will. But listen, I've told this story to people time after time after time when they, I wasn't here in 96, but I got here in 97. And for me, the greatest example of leadership that I saw from you was really in kind of your final couple of weeks with the Rangers was in September of 98 when you play, and we're talking about playing with injuries. Was it a broken foot or a broken toe that you had in Baltimore?
No, it was it was a broken elbow that I had with the Rangers, and I played through it.
No, but in Baltimore in September of 98, you had like a broken foot or a broken toe. You strapped on, I remember watching you during BP, you strapped on like some piece of plastic that you had cut off of one of Pudge's old shin guards. You went out there, and that night you had 2 infield hits, right? This is a team that's down.
You were bothered by plantar fasciitis that year. That was what it was.
And then I had fouled the ball off like Evan was talking about. I broke a toe. So.
Yep. You had 2 infield hits in that game, right? And set up a 5-0 comeback. So, I mean, that's the example kind of for me that showed what a leader you were, was the idea of we go out and we post up every day. You remember that, what I'm talking about?
I do remember what you're talking about. And, that was a case of, hey, look, even though I'm a little banged up here, I'm still going to give you 1,000% of what I got. And it just so happened, like you talked about, it just so happened there was an infield hit or two where I had to leg it out, even all banged up and all that sort of stuff, still found a way to make it work and, set up the dudes behind me and, became a team win. And not only was it a team win, it led to a AL West championship.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody had almost given up on that team with about 20 games to play, and you guys really came back after that stretch. That was a 5-0 lead that they overcame in Baltimore.
Right.
And in the ninth inning, Will legs out an infield hit, and Pudge then hits a home run to give it a 6-5 lead.
Right.
Yeah, man. I remember when Pudge hit that ball. I was on first base, and the first thing I thought about was, "Oh, good, I get to jog. I don't have to hustle."
And that team, that 98 team, Doug Melvin turned over the left side of the infield at the trading deadline with Royce Clayton and Todd Zeal, and went out and got Todd Stottlemyre. But that leads to the question, and the 2 years you were there, not being able to get over the hump with the Yankees, the 2 years, 96 and 98, those Yankee teams were absolutely dominating. But it was a little frustrating, I would say, for the ball club that we didn't have more success in the playoffs, especially 96, which was really frustrating after winning Game 1 in New York.
Yeah, no, we winning Game 1, and we were actually winning Game 2 late in the game, and wound up, giving up that lead. Had a few little walks and a blooper or two here and there. But, if you look at it, I'm definitely one of those guys that look myself in the mirror and, I'm able to say, hey, look, I did a good job or I did a terrible job. You need to do a little bit better. And, both the 96 and 98 teams, we were really good. Don't get me wrong. We were really good. But, the Yankees wound up winning the World Series both of those years. They were a little bit better than us, and they executed at the times that they needed to execute, and we didn't. So, for those reasons, we didn't win the World Series. But 96 especially, that was the first ever championship in Ranger history, going back to when they were the Senators. And so, it is definitely a source of pride for me, knowing that, as Evan and I talked about a minute ago, was, coming to Texas and wanting to win, and we won. And the first ever time that the Rangers won, and, you're talking about baseball in September instead of talking about the Cowboys.
Well, I can't let you go without asking you a very simple question. I know in your role now with the Giants, you do a lot with hitting, and I know the Giants have in the last couple of months have gone through some struggles with hitting. But let me just ask you a very general question here. What do you think of hitting in Major League Baseball today?
Well, to put it mildly, it sucks. You and John both know, because you alluded to some of these names. You're talking about, Rusty Greer, myself, Juan Gonzalez, Pudge Rodriguez. You're talking about four guys right there that are all 300 hitters in one lineup. And, now, last year in the National League, there were four 300 hitters in the whole league. So that just speaks volumes for itself right there. I mean, people talk about, there's more velocity and, you got to deal with that. That's, if you face velocity on an everyday basis, you're going to get used to it. It's the fact that, guys look at themselves now and they think everything is mechanical. Oh, well, my hands didn't do this or my feet didn't do that. No, man, it's the fact that, you're not adjusting to how they're pitching you. If they're pitching you up, you need to get your hands higher. If they're pitching you away, you need to get a little closer to the plate. If they're pitching you in, back off the plate. And none of that is being done right now on a major league basis. You
find that hitters that you work with, and I don't want you to slam any Giants hitters, but I mean,
I don't care. I'll throw anybody under the bus.
I know you will. But I mean, like for me, the thing that you just said is in game and almost sometimes pitch to pitch adjustments. And it feels to me like what I watch in the game now is, like you said, everybody is focused on the mechanical, on the swing, and not what do I need to do to get this ball in play or advance the runner. Do you see fewer team at bats?
That is so correct right there. For me personally, I want to see guys that grind and put the ball in play and look, make the opposition field the ball as much as possible, and they're going to throw one away here and there, and then that leads to a big inning. Instead of, being okay with a strikeout, swinging out your ass when you got 2 strikes, and then just walking back to the dugout like, oh, okay, that's okay. No, it's not okay. It's, part of a good hitter is grinding and finding a way to put the ball in play.
You won't have any recollection of this, but first year on the beat in '97, we're in Seattle, that house of horrors, and my aunt had just passed away. I was very close with her, and I couldn't get back to Atlanta for the funeral. And I'm sitting in the dugout. I had come down there early and was just sitting in the dugout. I was sad, and Will comes out, and I my awful impression of you is this very high pitch, like, "What are you doing out here?" And I said, well, I'm not in the mood for anything like this. And then Will said something like, that's a problem with Seattle. The rain puts everybody in a bad mood. And he walked off. And I was in this horrible place, and all I could do was kind of laugh. So I appreciated that, and it stayed with me for 30 years.
I appreciate it. Thank you. One of the things, and, I learned this in San Francisco, and I tried to teach my teammates in Texas was, hey, look, you go out there and you do a job, and you do it whether you succeed or whether you fail. But people need to know. And so you have to be in front of your locker every day and answer questions. If you're the hero, oh, yay, everybody's going to pat you on the back, how great you did. If you're the GOAT, and you just made an error and cost us a ball game, you better be in front of that locker too and accept responsibility. And a lot of my teammates did that. And I got to tip my cap to them for doing that.
And you set an example. I will say this, too. You set an example because, and I said this to Rusty, I think that Rusty picked out so much of what you brought leadership-wise. And then in Rusty's last couple of years, Michael Young got here, and I think Michael really took up from Rusty things that he had gotten from you. And I think for really 25 years here, there was this very easy to delineate line of what it meant to be the clubhouse spokesman. And you just described it entirely. Is you're in front of your locker, you answer questions, not so much because I need quotes for the newspaper or anything like that, but because if you don't answer questions, then you're forcing somebody else on your team to answer questions for you. And that's not a position you want to put teammates in.
Exactly. And, you hit the nail on the head right there. And, if you're a grown man, act like a grown man. Don't act like a little baby and go run and hide. No, stand in front of your locker and face the music, whether it's good music, whether it's bad music. And guess what? It all has to do with, your performance out on the field. And if you don't want to face the bad music, well, then do a good job out on the field.
All right, well, this has been great, Will.
Well, and as a PR guy, just saying, I really appreciated the 5 years you were there because you stood up and you set a good example for the team.
But he gave you unmitigated crap too, John.
Yes, he did. But that's
yes.
And
we still got to have a little fun.
Right, right, and that doesn't happen anymore. Players are not like that anymore. So,
and John, thank you for all of those years of service for the Rangers. Now you're still doing it. I can't believe it. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I can't either. So. Well, Will Clark was obviously a big part of the 1996 season, and it was an interesting year for the Rangers. Obviously, they broke that playoff drought, and, having worked here for a long time, saying this club couldn't withstand the second half collapses because of the heat, it was interesting how the club actually won the division that year. Rangers were in first place every day in 1996. They got off to a 6-0 start. They swept the Red Sox and their former manager, Kevin Kennedy, right out of the gate. And on September 11th, they were 83-62 with a 9-game lead. And from that point on, things got a little hairy. The club lost 9 out of 10, went to Seattle as part of that. And at that point in the Kingdome, it was a house of horrors for the Rangers. Doug Rader, I think, called it the Voodoo Palace when he was managing. Lost 4 straight there. And on September 20th at California, there was still the California Angels. Rangers had a 5-4 lead with 2 outs in the bottom of the 10th inning. Mike Stanton was on the mound. Garrett Anderson hit a 2-run double, and it was crushing. lost to the Angels 6-5. Rangers have a game lead now. And I think a lot of us who had been around the team, and again, this is all very, subjective because the current team doesn't have all of these demons, but they're like, what if we blow a 9-game lead here and don't win the division? We had a 9-game lead with 16 to play. Well, bring in John Burkett, bring in Ken Hill. They stuffed it up the Angels on Saturday and Sunday, got our lead back to 2. Club goes to Oakland, splits 2, and then Burkett beats the Angels again in the final 4 games of the series were against the Angels in Arlington. He wins the Thursday game, and the Rangers' magic number, Evan, is at 1 at that point. And either a Ranger win or a Seattle loss, and I think at that point, again, it's kind of like the World Series last year. You didn't take a breath until it was 5-0, or until Simeon hits the home run in the 9th inning. And, of course, the Rangers, in typical Ranger fashion, they play their longest game of the season, 5 hours and 5 minutes, 15 innings. And at 11:52 p.m., the old manual scoreboard at the ballpark in Arlington, the final score goes up that the A's have beaten the Mariners, and they were playing in Oakland too, so it was a late game. And the crowd just kind of went nuts. The problem is the players could not. We were in the middle of this game. It was 2-2 in extra innings, and it was just the dugout was a little muted because there's not much you could do, and you still needed the win for seeding to some extent. So the Rangers go on and lose in 15 innings, tip of 4-3. But then the celebration went all night, and it was so much fun in the clubhouse that night to watch these guys. And again, a monkey came off that team had pressure on it. They were playing for 35 years.
Was it a snow monkey that came off there?
No, that had already taken place,
okay.
I believe. Or maybe not. Maybe the snow monkeys were after with Nolan. But if you look at the lineup the next day, there were 9 new guys in the lineup. And that team, the 96 team, every starter had over 500 bats. Johnny Oates played the same 9 guys every day. And then you look at the lineup, and it's Kurt Stillwell, and it's Kevin Brown, the catcher, Benji, guys that never played or whatever, because these guys were in no condition to take the field for a day game. I had to do the notes. It was the PR guy's job is never done, but it was and it was a great celebration for a team that played together all season long.
Well, it's the one thing I feel like in Ranger history that I wasn't quite here for. 96 was the last year I covered the Marlins, and I had John Burkett for the first half of the year, and then had Rick Helling for the second. But I can't imagine what it was like, to be in year 25 and still trying to get that first playoff berth. And so I can only imagine, knowing what I know now about the angst of Ranger fans, how much of a burden that was to get over this. Because, look, I have to admit, growing up in Atlanta in the 70s and in Florida a little bit, and then going back to Atlanta, never. This was pre-interleague play. You never really saw the Rangers, and the narrative around the country was the Rangers were just they also participated,
right? And they got Nolan Ryan, and that brought a little individual notoriety to the franchise. But the hunt for Red October that year, the red in the stands for the 1 to 2 playoff games we got against the Yankees, it was pretty amazing. And fans that go back to that generation, I think, was it as important as the World Series in 10 and 11 or 20? No, obviously, but for us in Arlington, it was huge.
The narrative, I think, around the Rangers really did start to change in '94 when Will signed here. When really the ballpark, the entire club was rebranded, right? Because you signed Will, which was really the first real premier free agent. Nolan was
42,
and he was coming home to Texas and all
exactly.
that. And I think there were a lot of people who thought this was going to be 1 year and he's out.
Exactly.
The new ballpark opened, and it was, it was majestic. And the uniform rebrand, which I thought was I thought from my perspective, looking at it from the outside, I thought the change in the logos and the change in the hats and everything, I thought it was a really classic look that the Rangers went to. So you had a complete rebranding of this franchise. And
you had a new manager, and that had a lot to do with it. And Johnny's demeanor during that stretch in 96, calm demeanor, was a lot better than mine, believe me.
Yeah, calm would not be a word I would ascribe to you.
Well, that's kind of a look back at that first stretch of Rangers success. 96 was followed by 98 and 99.
Actually, it was followed by 97 and then
right,
98 and 99.
Right, that's true, but 97 was not so good. Rangers' big obstacle in those years was the New York Yankees, and it was a little depressing when the offense just couldn't hit in 3 straight American League Division Series. But we want to thank you for joining us for Sports Day Rangers.
Don't forget to check out more sports content from the Dallas Morning News and dallasnews.com. Our Sports Day Insider, my podcast with columnist Kevin Sherrington and a guest from the staff, appears in the same Sports Day Insider feed every week, so it's easy for you to find 2 podcasts for the price of none.
If you have any questions for us, you can ask us on X. And please ask us some questions so we can get your input.
Thanks to Will Clark for joining us this week. It was a real thrill to talk to Will. John and I will talk to you all next week.